I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube, Jules Sage, joined by the author of the Dark Shadows Daybook, my buddy Patrick McCray, and we're here to talk about the Dark Shadows Daybook UnBound. Uh, I have a couple questions for you, my friend. Number one, how long did it take you to actually publish the physical copies?
Oh, well, you're going to get the thousand. By the way, I have to say, Jewel, it's good to finally make it onto your show. We've never gotten to talk before, so I'm very privileged. No, I am very privileged. Thank you for having me on. I genuinely mean that every time. There was this thing on Saturday Night Live back in the 70s, late 70s, where Buck Henry, who's a writer, comedy writer, helped create Get Smart, had hosted the show so many times, they had a call-in vote of people like, do you want Buck to host anymore, or do you want him to be forbidden from being on the show ever again? And people voted to ban him from the show. He had been on so many times. I'm afraid somebody's going to do that with me and you. Okay, so as to your question, it took a while. I actually put together the first form of it in September, early September of 2021. And my initial desire was to have it out to coincide with the Jonathan Frid documentary coming out.
Yeah.
And that had been a fairly hot possibility. And then the conversation suddenly went from, yeah, to, well, there's still some heat behind the first book, so let's stick with that. And that made sense. So I was like, oh, okay. And then it sort of accumulated. I basically had a bunch of stuff that my friend Callie Meister, because Callie picked out a lot of the daybook pieces, and she's a very fine playwright. And I used about half of her stuff in the first daybook, and then I supplemented it with other things that I thought were she's a fine writer, but she's not that familiar with Dark Shadows, which is kind of what I wanted. But there were pieces that needed to go in, and so I put them in. Anyway, and so the leftover stuff was Dark Shadows Daybook UnBound. And somehow, I kept writing good pieces, and so it kept getting, fuller and fuller and fuller. And because by that point, I had really hit my rhythm, and I knew what I was doing. So it took, it could have been published at any point for a couple of years. However, every time there was a delay, or every time I thought, well, let me keep working on it, it was kind of like a stew that stays in the crock pot an extra few hours. It just got richer and more interesting. And I had I was moving towards doing something, and then last fall I started to get really serious about it. And that's when I started, trying to give it a title and stuff like that. And I was having a conversation with a guy, I'm going to butcher his last name, and I'm so sorry. His name's John Winaris, who is one of the Twitter roleplay gods on Dark Shadows Daybook. And or not on Dark Shadows. I'm sorry, I got a weird message that came through. On Twitter roleplay.
Yeah.
He's especially good as Roger Collins.
Yeah, I've seen.
And John is an incredibly bright man. He's a First Amendment scholar. I think he's a death row attorney in New York.
Wow.
He writes about religious topics and fencing and the Victorian author Anthony Trollope. He's just a bright guy. And John and I found ourselves in a conversation through Twitter, and he said, well, I'd like to look at at UnBound. And so at that time, I think it's called Unchained. And so I sent it to him, and he was very enthusiastic. And that started to make me think that maybe I have something extra. Gordon then really helped. Gordon Dymowski helped with restructuring parts of it. because you had a very early draft of it in fall of 2001. Also, you had one of the first drafts. And so he helped me restructure it, and I started to get really serious about it probably last fall. And the Kindle version ended up coming out. That kind of was due to an almost accident with Amazon. I think I was sort of contractually obligated to put something up. And then we hit delays with the print version, and those were to my advantage. I'm very grateful for those delays because I was able to just reshape and hone and reshape. And I ended up typesetting the book myself, which was really interesting because it gave me a lot of interaction with not just the words, but the presentation of them, because that's a whole part of crafting a book, is the actual physical life of the book. And the first book had such a beautiful physical execution. I knew that I had to, I was not an artist, so that was a problem. However, I also had to keep something that would be in that flavor and in that feel. So that frankly led me to be far more sophisticated than I normally would have been. And so then things finally got really serious. I had typeset it in April, and then we hit a delay, and it was almost ready to come out in April. And I stopped it, put it back on the blocks, added a bunch of stuff. The Nimoy piece has not made it in. That's going to have to be in the next one, Jewel, and I'm very sorry.
No,
I just could not figure out in the flow of it how to do it. But the Who's Who is in there, and that 1841 piece. So it just got finished, and I am still dueling with Ingram Spark about certain issues on the hardcover. So the hardcover was supposed to come out today. It should be out tomorrow.
Okay. I
don't know if that was the dullest answer you have ever gotten or not. Was that interesting? Should we do that again?
No, I like it because it felt natural. And you said the hardcover should come out tomorrow.
Ingram Spark keeps sending me copies saying, digital, saying, hey, we need you to review this before we put it out.
Yeah.
And so you download it, and then it gives you this list of options. And the list of options says, I don't want this book to come out, or I have revisions to upload. But it doesn't have looks good, let's get it out there.
Yeah.
So I'm having to write to them saying, I am begging you, please put this out there. However, Penny Dreadful got her copy like in 2 days.
Cool.
And she sent me pictures of it, and it's great. It looks really good.
Cool. When you were doing the artwork for your book, how nervous were you? Because you said you're not an artist.
Well, I mean, there's not a lot of artwork in the book for one thing. I am more of a cool font kind of guy. Wallace has a very specific style. He has a very specific voice, and I wanted to boil that down pretty much to a single glyph, a single symbol. And so I did. And the symbol is kind of this, Victorian clip art of a skull, which is a very Wallace McBride image, with the chapter numbers above it, but it has fangs that are added. However, it's very subtle. It looks like kind of a weird medical drawing, and that echoes kind of something in the first Daybook. I don't know if I was that nervous. Here's the thing. This is something I learned about directing, and this is something I learned about art in general. Write to your budget.
Yeah.
Meaning, if you are doing I think I gave this example on a show we did a little while ago. If you're doing a time travel story and you establish that the method of time travel is putting a nickel on your forehead, and you put the nickel on your forehead and the camera pans in or, zooms in on the nickel And then when it pulls out, you're in that other time period. Your special effects are great.
Yeah.
Because you have not, you've created rules that did not necessitate anything more than what you have. So with this, I basically wanted to set it up so that it would, I would not show the fact that I don't know what I'm doing by sticking with just stuff I did know how to do and making those good.
When you first initially went to write the Dark Shadows Daybook UnBound, is there something that you initially had in there that you don't now, or?
I don't think so. I don't think so. The pieces Callie had left over were very, they were good.
Yeah.
They were good. They were a little more random. They were a little more pop culture-y. And at this point, I can't tell you what was in the original version of UnBound, which I think was called After Dark. It was going to be Dark Shadows Daybook After Dark, like Playboy After Dark, and what was added. So I don't really remember, but I think it basically is something that's just lacquered up, the levels over the past couple of years.
What's your favorite thing that Kelly wrote that she put in there? Is there something specific
that Kelly picked out?
Yeah.
Jewel, I gotta say, I don't really remember. I wish I could tell you. It was just different entries. Okay, so here's kind of the difference between the two books, and Gordon's talked about this a little bit. The first book, I wanted to make sure to get the entries that really hit the series high notes.
Yeah.
And so, some of what I thought is, oh God, what do I have left? Well, what I had left was actually a lot of good stuff, because there was stuff that Callie picked out that was well written. It wasn't necessarily about things that were on the surface level high notes, but the pieces in UnBound are written later, largely, than the ones in Dark Shadows Daybook, and so they are a little deeper. They're a little more opinionated. I think they're a little smarter. They're a little more in depth.
This book feels, and I've told you this before, it feels much more adult than the first one, and I love that for it.
Much more what?
Much more adult, much more mature.
Oh, really? Okay, thank you.
I like how you really got into Barnabas and Angelique's relationship and what it meant to the series in this book. That really hit home to me with this one, and it made me appreciate Angelique even more.
I'll tell you, Jewel, I had a thought while this book was being put together, and I think I managed to put it into an entry. Yeah. And the thought was this. I rethought Angelique very deeply, and I realized that although she does terrible things, and you have to kind of parse that out. Yeah. You have to, okay, yes, she does do terrible things. Putting that aside, the size of her love is really impressive. The risks that she takes just to get to America, how much she gives up, considering what her power is to be this serving girl, and just her kind of pursuit of him through the centuries is a very profound love. And where that comes into focus, because you can say, yeah, it's profound, it's profoundly disturbed, she's, this time stalker, but also when she gives him his humanity back for the last time in 1840, she is giving up the idea that Barnabas can continue to be with her through time. Because one of the things Barnabas really emphasizes is, Angelique, you're not human. We really, in 1840, really get that idea that you are some other life form at this point. And because she's not human, I don't think she wanted another witch running around. And so really, I think maybe subconsciously, when she made Barnabas a vampire, she made him the one other type of creature that could be her companion through time.
Yeah.
And when she gives him his humanity back, of course, it's the right thing to do, but she is giving up this thing that has kept her going for the longest time. Now you could say, well, yeah, but that Angelique is just, a few decades after 1795. Yeah, okay. Nevertheless, it's strangely enough, doing the right thing is a tremendous sacrifice for her.
She makes a lot of decisions too that are like, when you look at 1897 too, she makes a lot of decisions that to help Barnabas. She makes the effort to be his sort of partner in crime in 1897. They're very Batman and Robin-esque in 1897 almost. And the 1840 stuff, I mean, look, to say Jonathan Frid and Laura Parker had great chemistry, that's not a shock. They did. But to see how they played out the Barnabas Angelique storyline, we've talked about how adult 1841 is, parallel time, but 1840 is very adult too. It hits, it punches you as hard as it can, and then you stand up and go, hit me again. You really do.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's just, you really enjoy when she decides to give him this. It's not because of Diablos or any other thing. She's doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Diablos made me do it. Yeah. She is, and that's that's a mature move. It's also a move by writers who know they're saying goodbye to these characters, so they no longer have to kind of be doing the same but different. They can finally give them some closure.
Do you know if Sam Hall or Gordon Russell ever wrote for Marvel or DC after Dark Shadows?
No, they didn't. I have been communicating a little bit with Matthew Hall.
Yeah.
And I have a question I would really like to ask him. I don't know if I'll get the opportunity, but the question is, were you into, 1960s fantasy genre stuff like comics, Marvel comics and the TV of that era? And if so, was Sam looking over your shoulder or, kind of picking up a copy of Doctor Strange as he headed to the commode or whatever, was, that's a horrible image, I'm sorry, but you read things. And so do you think that was an influence on him? If he said yes, I would say, did you sell those comics afterwards, and did you tell people where they had been? No. If he did, it wouldn't surprise me. If he didn't, okay, Sam's an imaginative guy, but I really think having a 12-year-old, or so son, he was around David Hennessy's age, I think, was probably very influential on Sam. And my God, I can only imagine. I think Hollywood made a big mistake by not tapping Sam and Gordon to come write for, $6 Million Man and Night Gallery and Incredible Hulk and, all of the genre programming that followed. They might not have wanted to do that. For one thing, I think, probably Sam and Grayson really liked New York.
Yeah.
They didn't want to move to Hollywood. And another thing was, that may not have been their genre. I think sometimes you get a really good synergy when you take someone from one genre and you force them to write something that's out of their element, because you are dealing with the rules of the new genre, but you are bringing the spirit that you had with your other stuff. So Sam was a serious playwright. And so to take someone who's a serious playwright and then say, now I want you to apply those ideas to vampires and werewolves and, Count Petofi and things like that, you get a depth and a richness that you wouldn't normally get. However, gosh, I just really would have loved to have seen what they could have done with those other pieces of programming. The artist that I liken them to is a guy named Kenneth Johnson. Kenneth Johnson was a Carnegie Mellon drama grad, which means it was a very fine school. It's where George Papard went. And it was one of the brightest, smartest drama schools of its era, and even of our own. And Ken Johnson wrote. He was the brains behind Incredible Hulk, and then V. And he brings a lot of his literary chops to those projects, and I think they could have had a lot of the same qualities.
Yeah. When with the Daybook UnBound, of all the stuff that maybe got left out of the book, what's one thing that you sort of regret that got left out most?
I think I probably could have done even more in terms of little extra essays about the essays. And while that sounds really self-involved, it's not. I've got plenty of stuff that's self-involved, but it's not that. Because a lot of the essays were responses to things that were going on in the news and in other things in that time. And I had intended to do more of that, and I didn't. There was another thing that I really thought about doing. Wallace thought it was a good idea also, and it just kind of fell through the cracks. But I have a very weird base of knowledge, and I always have. I've just gathered strange trivia about things, and my brain holds on to odd pop culture thises and that's, and I sprinkle those through the daybook. Not because I'm trying to be obscure or something, but ultimately because I'm not getting paid. And trust me, books don't. You have to be, Stephen King or something to really generate a lot of, profit on these things. So I don't approach these as money-making enterprises. So my number one audience is pleasing me.
Yeah.
As and it should be that way for any artist. Ultimately, they have to be proud of what they do. But I had thought about trying to make a glossary of weird references that I make kind of in the background, so that people could say, "Oh, what's that about?" and look it up. But that seemed to be a little too look at me, and it's also condescending, because it presumes, because I have been engaged in interesting dialogues about my vocabulary, because I like the big words. I like using the big words, and but that's how I speak. My mother was an English teacher who loved words, and my father is an excellent vocabulary. So, and neither of them had any kind of issues about using a fairly robust vocabulary, and either letting me pick things up through context, or they just, always set a good example with this. Whenever my parents would encounter a word that they didn't know, they didn't get frustrated. They didn't act like, here he comes.
Mm.
Here he comes. Here's Lincoln. The old ham. They just said, "Oh, what does that word mean?" Mm-hmm. And they'd look it up, or they'd find out, and then it was like, "Oh, cool! Now I know a new word," and that was it. And I don't really know where I was going with that, but condescending. So I got not a lot, but I got a little bit of feedback after the second book about, people trying to do me favors by saying, "Oh, maybe you should tone down the vocabulary in these books, because the people won't possibly know what you're talking about." And I said, well, okay, because these books exist in digital form right now, you can just press on the screen and the definition comes up. Yeah. 2, who are you to presume what words people are familiar with and what words they're not familiar with. And, even if the pronunciation is maybe foreign to them, that could just mean that they have read the words, and they've seen them in books, but they it's like biting into a York peppermint patty. Lincoln, go away. I sound like a true Southerner there. Lincoln, go away. I'll get a big dog named General Sherman. We'll see how you do with that. No, they're on the same side. What am I saying? Anyway, I'll get a dog named Nathan Bedford Forrest, and you can attack it relentlessly and make it regret it was born. I hate Nathan Bedford Forrest, a jerk. I heard he was a transvestite too. Yeah, the founder of the Klan. I would probably mark myself for death with that. Well, you get a red hat fast and disguise myself. Anyway, but I think it's presumptuous to assume what people know and what they don't know, and what people are comfortable learning and what they're not comfortable learning. So I ultimately did not do that. I thought that was kind of a weird move.
I think with just speaking as someone who writes their own stories, like when I decided to make my vampire ancient Greek, I wanted her to be able to speak it through like reading it. So I looked up ancient Greek. So when she was speaking to her father, they were speaking ancient Greek.
That's right.
I just copied and pasted the words on my thing because, again, I don't know ancient Greek. I looked it up. So there's nothing wrong with learning something new or looking something up.
Why on earth do you want to stay in a world where you only encounter what you already know?
Right.
I mean, that's how boring. And what a disservice you're doing to yourself when you approach things that way. But I think the important thing that I do want to touch on about that, it's been something I've been a little aware of, is that the English language is one of the largest and most precise languages on earth. Mm-hmm. The larger your vocabulary, it doesn't mean the smarter you sound or even the smarter you are. It means the more precise you can be at communicating. Mark Twain said the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. And so I've always taken a lot of pleasure with language. Where I think some of it comes from is that if you grew up in a household where the vocabularies were not, kind of wild and exotic. Which is a lot of people. That's not someone's fault. I mean, it's never your fault about the household you grow up in. Right. Then what happens is that vocabulary is this thing that they throw at you in school, and it's a matter of, oh God, am I going to get tested on this? Yeah. Am I going to fail a test if I don't know this word or something like that? And so I think there is anxiety and resentment. It would be like if I sat here kind of, spouting off the quadratic equation or something and expecting everyone to, I don't know. There's got to be some math-based or science-based analogy to it that would immediately trigger kind of anxiety. I just happened to grow up in a household with an English teacher, an English professor, in fact. And so PBS was on. This was in the golden days of PBS, and so you learn half of what you're ever going to know. I read this once. By the time you're 4 years old, and so in the early years of your life, you're a sponge. You're picking up everything, and so I picked up a lot of language, and I had the confidence to feel okay about not necessarily knowing exactly what the words mean, but knowing enough about them that I could look at how they were used in a sentence and get a feel.
What happened? Oh, shit. Oh, come on. Well, we're going to save that part. This, if he doesn't come back. What the hell happened? It just both got out. Oh. Yeah, I'm going to stop that one. I see this. Oh, shit.